Light in the lecture hall came from one source, the colossal hologram of a stalking nightmare. Within the diorama, a creature of mobile darkness drank the starlight of a simulated nebular forest. It was long and sinuous, its body a patch of absolute nothingness. Its only features a constellation of cold, blue eyes and claws with edges that wavered, distorting the light around them. The Tenebran Shadow Weaver. Professor Olin's voice, a resonant baritone with the crisp enunciation of his avian kith heritage, filled the amphitheater. His tall, slender form was silhouetted against the display, his head, with its crest of feathers that shifted from cerulean to emerald with his slightest movement, held high. A Tier 2 predator. It hunts by excising its prey from space-time for a nanosecond, allowing it to strike without ever technically being in the same physical location. A living whisper of murder, woven from starlight and silence. Of course, he added, a lecturer clarifying a fine point. This process requires immense energy, allowing for only one such strike per hunt. Moreover, the creature itself is as fragile as spun glass, potent but limited. He gestured, and the Shadow Weaver dissolved. It was replaced by a hulking armored behemoth, a walking fortress of interlocking obsidian-like plates that stood atop a simulated volcanic peak. And finally, the pinnacle, the undisputed alpha, the Valdressian Plate Lord. Olin's voice swelled with a pride that was both academic and deeply personal. Tier 1. Its body is a carapace of biomineralized armor, layered sheets of protein and metal capable of withstanding direct atmospheric entry. Its primary weapon is a focused sonic blast, a targeted earthquake that can liquefy the internal organs of its prey. From a kilometer away. I was present on the expedition that first recorded it. From a shielded bunker 5 kilometers away, we watched it turn a granite mountain into gravel with a single sustained pulse. It does not hunt for sustenance. It hunts to eliminate competition, and it considers an entire planet its territory. The Plate Lord let out a silent, holographic roar that nonetheless seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. The students, a diverse menagerie of the galaxy's brightest, watched. Gorons, their lower pair of heavily muscled arms resting on their knees, while their upper pair took notes on data slates, sat beside wispy psionic Gelcor and small furry Crash, their multiple eyes wide. Olin spread his arms wide, the gesture of a maestro concluding a symphony. The Plate Lord faded, and the list appeared in the air. 13 names, ranked in descending order of lethality, growing in stark, authoritative text. "These," he stated, his voice resonating with the finality of a law being etched into stone, "are the 13 undisputed apex predators of the known galaxy, the pinnacle of evolutionary lethality. From the cellular deconstruction of the phage maw to the brute force of the Plate Lord, this list represents 50 standard years of research, 112 peer-reviewed papers, and the foundational text for the Galactic Concordancy's Threat Analysis Regulations. It is complete. It is definitive." He paused, letting the weight of his declaration settle. "Questions are, of course, pointless, but procedural norms dictate I ask for them nonetheless." A beat of stillness, then another. Then from the shadowed upper tiers at the very back of the hall, a single, unassuming hand was raised. Professor Olin's head feathers ruffled in a subtle, almost imperceptible sign of irritation. He squinted, his famously sharp kith eyes, capable of spotting a field mouse from a kilometer up, easily pierced the gloom. The hand belonged to the human, the quiet one, the exchange student from the Sol system, Carter, Cole Carter. He was an engineering student, Olin recalled, the thought accompanied by an involuntary curl of his lip, a plumber, essentially, dabbling in the hallowed halls of xenobiology. Yes, Mr. Carter. Olin's tone was that of a man indulging a child, who had asked why the sky wasn't green. You have a query regarding the established canon of galactic predators. The student lowered his hand. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it carried with a strange, calm clarity that cut through the cavernous space. Not a query, Professor. A correction. You missed one. A low murmur rippled through the assembled students. A Jalcor's head fronds vibrated with amusement. In the front row, a massive Goran student named Brev shifted his bulk, his lower set of arms crossing over his chest in a gesture of blatant skepticism. I missed one, Olin repeated, the words dripping with condescending delight. This was a teaching opportunity, after all, a live demonstration of flawed methodology. Indeed, one has been missed from a list that dictates interstellar policy and first contact regulations. Do you have any idea of the sheer unmitigated arrogance of that statement, Mr. Carter? Yes, Cole replied, with no change in his calm demeanor. I've calculated the probable socio-political ramifications. They're significant. That's why I'm pointing it out. This was not the response Olin expected. He had anticipated a fumbling, backpedaling apology. Instead, he got a cost-benefit analysis. Then by all means, Olin said, his voice taking on a dangerous silkiness, do not keep us in suspense. Name the mythical 14th predator. Cole's eyes met Olin's across the lecture hall. His gaze was steady, unwavering. Humans. The word, spoken so plainly, so devoid of theatrics, hung in the air for a solid 3 seconds. Then, the dam of university decorum broke. A wave of disbelief washed through the hall. It started as a ripple of confused murmurs, then escalated into snorts of derision, and finally outright laughter. Brev the Gorand let out a booming laugh that shook his massive frame. Humans? Brev roared, slapping his upper right knee. The soft skins, the ones who get winded walking up a flight of stairs. They need instruction manuals to operate their own tools. My cousin has a human groundskeeper on his orbital estate. He's terrified of spiders. The laughter intensified. Olin held up a hand, not to defend Cole, but to regain control of his classroom. He was a scientist, and this absurdity required a scientific public dismantlement. Silence! He commanded, and the room obeyed. He turned his full attention back to Cole, his expression one of profound academic pity. Mr. Carter, I am not a monster. I will give you this one opportunity to retract your statement, and we will all charitably assume you've been inhaling coolant fumes from whatever rudimentary engine you were tinkering with this morning. I haven't been near any coolant systems today, Professor, Cole said calmly, and I stand by my statement. Olin sighed, a long theatrical exhalation. Very well. He flicked his wrist, and the list of 13 predators vanished, replaced by a new holographic file. It was a standard galactic concordance data sheet, stamped with a large, dismissive classification. Official file, Homo sapiens, Olin read aloud, his voice a tool dissecting each word. Sentient species, Sol system origin, classification, Tier 9, non-threat. He let the words hang in the air. Tier 9 was the classification for creatures like the glimmer moth of Alpha Centauri, delicate, pretty, and utterly harmless. It was one step above inert geological formations. Let's review the data, shall we? Olin continued, pacing before the file as if prosecuting a case. Integument, soft, unarmored epidermis, highly susceptible to laceration, puncture, and radiation. Skeletal structure, low-density calcium composite, prone to fracture under moderate impact. Sensory array, auditory range, 20 to 20,000 hertz, laughably narrow. Olfactory senses, rudimentary. Vision, limited to a pathetic sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum. Natural weaponry. He paused for dramatic effect. None. No claws, no fangs of note, no venom sacs, bioelectric discharge, or psionic capabilities. He stopped and looked directly at Cole. He looked at the human, at his soft, dexterous hands resting on the desk before him. All Olin saw was the absence of weapons, the empty, helpless hands of a victim. Your species' greatest predatory achievement, Mr. Carter, is listed here as persistence hunting, which seems to be a glorified term for chasing something until it gets tired and falls over. The file concludes. Olin's voice dripped with finality. That tool use is a compensatory survival strategy, a crutch developed to overcome your myriad biological failings. Your claim doesn't just contradict my list, Mr. Carter. It contradicts the entire, empirically established body of xenological data. He gave Cole a sharp, predatory smile. Given this evidence, your claim is not merely wrong. It stands in defiance of all known facts. The predator you describe simply does not align with the biological reality of Homo sapiens. Therefore, your hypothesis is rejected on foundational principles. No one spoke. Every eye in the room was fixed on the lone student in the back row. Olin waited for the crushing weight of factual evidence to do its work. Cole's response was, as always, quiet and measured. Professor, your analysis is correct. The predator you described does not align with our biology. A murmur of confusion rippled through the hall. Cole let it die down before continuing. You're simply looking at the wrong data. Olin was momentarily stunned. The human's agreement was disarming, a bizarre tactical concession that made no sense. It was like a duelist admitting his opponent's sword was, in fact, sharp. But the follow-up, the wrong data, the sheer audacity. Olin's brief confusion hardened back into intellectual certainty. The student's error was now compounded by a thin layer of cleverness, which Olin found even more irritating. The wrong data? Olin chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Mr. Carter, the data set is the organism, its biology, its physical form. That is the very foundation of xenobiology. To suggest otherwise is to suggest we study the stars by analyzing the mud. It is absurd. He saw the path forward clearly now. A demonstration. A practical, undeniable lesson. A bold hypothesis, he declared to the class. his voice once again booming with professional authority.
"Requires extraordinary proof. An extraordinary claim requires an extraordinary demonstration. You claim my data is wrong. Very well. Let us test your data."
A thrill went through the student body. Practical exams in Xenobiology 301 were legendary, and usually reserved for graduate students testing military hardware.
"We will adjourn to the Crucible at the end of the academic day,"
Olin announced. He turned his gaze on Cole, a hawk spotting its prey.
"You, Mr. Carter, will be the test subject. The environment will be the red desert of Acrid 7. Your opponent will be a simulated Tier 1 predator. Not the Plate Lord. Its ranged attack would make for a dull and brief test. No, you will face a contemporary. The silent, invisible hunter. The Acridian Sandstalker."
A collective gasp went through the room. Even Brev looked momentarily impressed. The Sandstalker was a legend, a creature so perfectly adapted to ambush hunting that most of its victims were never even found.
"The simulation is, of course, non-lethal,"
Olin continued, their statement a mere formality.
"It is designed to end upon the system registering a terminal diagnosis, a state of biological incapacitation from which recovery would be beyond any chance, a crushed skull, a severed spine, exsanguination. The computer is an unflinching diagnostician. Rest assured, Mr. Carter,"
he fixed Cole with a final piercing stare.
"The only danger you will face is the intellectual one of being proven unequivocally, irrefutably, and very, very publicly wrong."
Cole Carter simply nodded, his expression unchanged. "Understood, Professor. What time?" The corridor to the Crucible was long, white and sterile, smelling faintly of sterilized air and antiseptic. The polished floor reflected the harsh, rhythmic pulse of the overhead lights. Cole's footsteps were nearly silent, a stark contrast to the deliberate, clicking stride of Professor Olin, who had intercepted him at the entrance to the wing.
"This is academically unsound, Mr. Carter,"
Olin said, falling into step beside him. He wasn't speaking to the student, but for the record, for the invisible arbiters of academic integrity he felt were always watching.
"It's a waste of the university's resources and your time. More importantly, it is a needless exercise in humiliation. There is no shame in retracting a flawed premise. In fact, it is the cornerstone of the scientific method. Admit your error, and we can all return to our studies."
Cole didn't look at him. He kept his eyes fixed on the heavy circular door at the end of the hall. His mind wasn't on academic decorum. It was on a news report from the fringe territories, a report that had been buried by the larger galactic networks. A Kith pirate vessel had raided a human colony on Glee 667cc, citing the Concordance's non-threat classification as legal justification for what they termed resource acquisition from a non-sentient equivalent species. The pirates had been driven off, but not before 63 colonists were killed. He still had the last message from his aunt, a botanist on that colony, saved on his personal data slate. It was a cheerful, rambling message about a new hybrid tomato, and it cut off mid-sentence with a sound he could never scrub from his memory. The Kith government had issued a formal apology and a small reparations package, the diplomatic equivalent of a shrug. The non-threat label functioned as a target painted on the back of every human in the galaxy. It was a license for strongest species to push, to bully, to harvest. This wasn't about his pride. It was about changing the data. "Professor," Cole said, his voice low and even. When a system consistently produces outputs that don't match observed reality, the system is flawed. The flaw is in your definition of predator. Olin stopped, his feathers bristling. My definition has stood for half a century. An old error is still an error. Cole replied, not unkindly. He reached the crucible door. I stand by my data. Olin watched him. For a moment, the arrogance in his sharp eyes wavered, replaced by a sliver of curiosity, buried under a mountain of certainty. He gestured to the door controls. As you wish. The world awaits. Cole placed his hand on the scanner. The heavy door hissed open, revealing a vast, empty chamber. A grid of grey floor tiles under a dome of neutral lighting. He stepped inside, and the door hissed shut behind him, sealing him in. Cole stood in the center of the grey grid. For a moment there was only the low hum of quiescent technology. Then the sharp, clean scent of ionizing static filled his nostrils, quickly replaced by a wave of oppressive dry heat that felt utterly real, carrying the faint metallic scent of scorched rock. The world resolved around him. The grey floor became rust-red sand, so fine it was almost dust. The neutral dome overhead blazed into a binary star system, one large, angry red giant and a smaller, blistering white dwarf, searing the landscape in a double-shadowed glare. Jagged, black rock formations sculpted by millennia of wind erupted from the desert floor. He noted outcrops of sharp, glassy obsidian among the weathered sandstone, a geological anomaly common to Acrid 7's violent, volcanic past. The oppressive heat was a physical weight. Cole could feel the synthetic grit of sand under the soles of his standard-issue university boots. Back in the lecture hall, the main holographic display had switched to a first-person view from Cole's perspective. Smaller inset windows showed his biometrics, heart rate, respiration, blood pressure, core temperature. The entire student body, along with several other curious faculty members who had heard the rumors, watched in a rapt stillness. Professor Olin stood at his lectern, arms crossed, a grimly satisfied expression on his face. Observe, class, the initial environmental shock. Note the physiological response, the elevated heart rate, the increased respiration, the classic precursor to the flight or fight response. In a true predator, we would now see a focusing, a preparation for the hunt in a prey species. He didn't get to finish his sentence. A line of displaced sand kicked up in a high-speed arc. It was coming. He didn't think. He reacted, throwing himself sideways with a desperate rolling dive. A scythe-like talon, the color of polished obsidian, and as long as his forearm, sliced through the air where his chest had been a millisecond before. The sound it made was a sharp shing of displaced air. Even without contact, he felt the pressure wave of its passage. A thin red line of fire bloomed on his left bicep, where the very tip of the talon had grazed him. The simulation's cold, female voice echoed in the chamber and in the lecture hall. Subject has sustained superficial laceration to left arm. Minor blood loss detected. Subject remains combat effective. The class gasped as one. The speed of the attack had been breathtaking. Cole scrambled to his feet. He ran. He didn't look back, just pure, desperate motion. In the lecture hall, Brev the Goran smirked, leaning to his neighbor.
See? He runs like a frightened thump-thump on my homeworld. He doesn't even zigzag. Basic prey behavior.
Professor Olin nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the main screen. The flight response. It was exactly as he'd predicted. The experiment was proceeding along expected lines. The human was prey, frightened, panicky prey. The end was only a matter of time. Cole ran. His mind was not panicking. It was working. The terror was a cold, separate thing, a subroutine running in the background. His primary consciousness was a whirlwind of calculation. He ran, lungs burning. 63 colonists. The sand dragged at his boots, each step a monumental effort. Aunt Julia's last message, that awful final sound, a blur distorting the air like heat haze gained on him. A predator toying with its meal. They called it resource acquisition because of a line of text in a file. He ducked behind a rock spur. The thought, a mission statement. This is an edit. His mind refocused with chilling clarity. Visual distortion, cloaking field, likely light bending, high energy consumption, must have a significant thermal signature. Displacement of sand, weight and footfall pattern, bipedal. Roughly 250 kilos, 300 long stride. It's not even sprinting, it's jogging. His eyes weren't scanning for the creature, they were scanning the environment. The rock formations, too perfect, too aesthetically pleasing in their jaggedness, procedurally generated. But the crucible wasn't a god space. It was a machine, a room, and every room had infrastructure. It had seams, power conduits, data relays, environmental regulators, maintenance access. They had to be integrated. Hidden within the simulation itself. You don't build a 10 billion credit simulator and then have a janitor walk onto the holodeck with a wrench. The access has to be part of the illusion. In the lecture hall, Olin's sharp gaze had shifted from the main screen to the small biometric inset. He saw the human's heart rate, 185 beats per minute, respiration frantic. Classic signs of terror and extreme physical exertion. And yet, something was wrong. The rhythm, it was too steady. It was the powerful, thrumming beat of a high-performance engine under maximum load, not the frantic, arrhythmic fluttering of a creature in the grip of pure panic. He recognized the signature. It wasn't fear. It was the rhythm of applied, exhaustive work. Olin's feathers settled. A knot of uncertainty, small and cold, began to form in his gut. What was the human working on? There, he almost missed it, on the face of a large black basalt monolith, a rock face that should have been a chaotic mess of natural fractures. There was an anomaly, a perfect rectangle, 3 meters tall and 1 meter wide. Its outline betrayed by a subtle difference in the texture of the simulated rock. It was almost invisible, but to an engineer's eye, trained to spot stress lines and fabrication seams, it stood out like a beacon, a heavy-duty, mag-locked maintenance panel. He changed direction, a sudden sharp pivot that cost him precious energy, and sprinted directly for the monolith. He ducked into a narrow gap between 2 rock spurs, momentarily breaking line of sight with his invisible pursuer. His eyes scanned the ground, sand, pebbles, rocks, and there it was, a chunk of the black, glassy obsidian he'd noted earlier, dense, hard, sharp-edged. He scooped it up without breaking stride. The rock was heavy in his hand, its sharp edge biting into his palm. A good weight, a good tool. The sand stalker, its hunt momentarily interrupted, slowed its pursuit. It rounded the rock spur, its form rippling the air like a heat mirage. It saw the small, soft creature, its chest heaving, backed up against a solid wall of rock, cornered. In its hand it held a small, dark stone. The alien mind of the perfect hunter, a mind that had never encountered this specific brand of desperation, interpreted the act as futile. A last pathetic gesture of defiance. A cornered animal picking up a pebble to throw at a hurricane. It paused, the distortion in the air growing more intense as it savored the final moments. This was the best part of the hunt, the moment the prey's hope finally died. Cole didn't try to throw the rock. He didn't try to pry at the almost invisible seam of the maintenance panel. That would be like trying to pry open a bank vault with a fingernail. The magnetic locks would be rated in tons. He was an engineer. He had studied the general schematics for standard Citadel high-energy conduits and their access points as part of his coursework on alien power systems. And an engineer knows that you don't fight a system's strengths. You attack its weaknesses. He took a firm stance, his back against the rock face, to the right of the panel. He hefted the dense piece of obsidian. He wasn't looking at the panel itself, but at a specific point on the rock facade about 2 feet to its left. The external locking mechanism, the physical part of the mag lock that engaged with the panel, wouldn't be in the panel itself. It would be housed in the wall beside it. It was a more secure, more robust design, and a physical mechanism, no matter how strong, was subject to the laws of physics, specifically shock and vibration. With a grunt of exertion, Cole swung the heavy rock like a hammer. He pulled all of his weight, all of his desperation into the blow. It wasn't a wild, panicked swing. It was a powerful, calculated strike, aimed at that precise point on the wall. The obsidian connected with the basalt with a sickening crack. The impact sent a violent shockwave through the solid rock. In the lecture hall, the sound was jarring. On the biometric display, Cole's heart rate spiked to 195, then immediately began to settle. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a heavy, grinding clunk that echoed in the sudden stillness, the magnetic locks on the hidden panel disengaged, a diagnostic fault, triggered by the violent, unexpected kinetic shock to the lock's housing, had caused an emergency release. It was a safety feature, designed to allow access if the electronic systems were fried. It was not, however, a feature designed to be triggered by a desperate primate with a rock. A vertical line of shadow appeared on the monolith. Cole dropped the obsidian. He jammed his fingers into the crack and pulled. The panel was immensely heavy, a solid slab of alloy nearly 100 kilograms in weight. It barely budged. His adrenaline-fueled strength was not enough. The hinges were industrial grade, designed to hold. He didn't try to lift it again. Instead, he picked up the sharp-edged obsidian. It was a hammer a moment ago. Now, it would be a lever. He jammed its sharpest point into the narrow gap between the top hinge and the frame, wedging it deep. Then, with a pained grunt, he put his full body weight on the end of the rock. Metal shrieked in protest. The top hinge pin, already micro-fractured by the shockwave of his hammer blow, bent with a groan. He threw his weight against it again. With a sharp snap, the pin gave way. The top of the heavy panel sagged outwards, its massive weight now hanging precariously on the bottom hinge alone. He repeated the process, jamming the obsidian into the lower hinge. It took less effort this time. With another application of focused leverage, he popped the bottom hinge free. The panel fell, crashing to the sandy floor with a heavy, resonant thud that kicked up a cloud of red dust. Inside the recess was the gut of the Crucible's environmental system. Robust physical infrastructure, insulated pipes as thick as his thigh, chunky mechanical levers painted in bright safety colors, and bundled sheaves of armored cable. This was the high-power, low-finesse side of the simulation. This was where the real work got done. His eyes immediately found what he was looking for, a large diameter pipe, sheathed in thick insulation, but so cold that a layer of white frost was blooming on its exposed joints and valves. The cryogenic coolant line for the entire sector of the chamber, and right next to it, a massive fire engine red lever, clearly labeled in galactic standard, manual coolant flush, emergency override, a purely physical failsafe for when everything else had gone catastrophically wrong. A new plan, audacious and insane, snapped into place in Cole's mind. A blacksmith's plan. He looked at the heavy meter by 3 meter maintenance panel he had just freed. Perfect. He dragged it over the recess, his boots slipping in the sand. The sand stalker watched, its heat-hazed form betraying its alien confusion. Its prey was no longer running. It was building something. This was not in its behavioral database. Its predatory instinct screamed that this was wrong, but its curiosity, the fatal flaw of so many intelligent hunters, held it in place. Cole worked with frantic, focused energy. He tilted the massive panel on its side. He jammed one of its sharp metallic edges under the handle of the big red flush lever, pushing it upward against the stiff resistance of the valve spring mechanism. The lever was now held in a state of high tension, straining to slam back down. Then he took the heavy panel's other end and propped it carefully against a small, jutting outcrop of rock just outside the maintenance recess. He adjusted it, nudged it, until it was balanced perfectly. A precarious high-tension hair trigger. The massive weight of the panel was holding the emergency coolant lever, open by the barest fraction of an inch of friction against the small rock outcropping. The slightest vibration, the slightest nudge to that supporting rock, and the panel would slip. His trap was complete. It was a purely physical machine, a simple lever and weight system, built from the constituent parts of the room itself. There were no electronics, no hacking, just gravity, mass, and leverage. He backed away slowly, deliberately making himself a target. He leaned against the main rock face, a few feet away from his trap, breathing heavily, making himself look exhausted and cornered. The perfect bait. He was panting, his arm was bleeding, his body was screaming with exhaustion. He looked, for all the world, like a creature at the end of its rope. The Sandstalker's patience finally broke. The strange, pointless activity of its prey was over. The game was done. It was time for the kill. It closed the distance in a silent, wavering rush. There was no finesse now, only the final, brutal application of overwhelming force. It wanted to see the light go out in this strange, soft creature's eyes. It rose up to its full, terrifying height, its form becoming clearer as it prepared to strike. A sleek, chitinous body, long, powerful legs, and 2 massive scythe-like talons. The talon rose, a black scythe against the twin suns. Then it fell. The target was the human's head. The intent was a single, decapitating blow that would smash the soft creature against the rock face he was cowering against. Cole wasn't there. At the last possible fraction of a second, he dropped, falling to the sand as the massive talon sliced the air above him. The Sandstalker, committed to the blow and unable to stop its momentum, struck the rock face with unimaginable force. Thwack! The sound was like a thunderclap. The entire monolith shuddered from the kinetic violence of the impact. Cracks spider-webbed across the simulated basalt, and the vibration, the immense shockwave of the Stalker's own attack, traveled through the rock. It traveled to the small outcropping where the heavy maintenance panel was so delicately balanced. The outcropping vibrated. The panel slipped, just a millimeter, but it was enough. The friction holding it in place was gone. The tension was released with the full unopposed force of its own 100-kilo weight. The panel slammed down onto the big red manual flush lever. The lever moved with the brutal, instantaneous finality of a guillotine. Whoomph! Cole felt the sound more than he heard it. A deep, gut-wrenching pressure, change that vibrated through the sand and up his bones. The air, already scorching, was instantly tainted with a new, razor-sharp cold, so intense it felt like inhaling powdered glass. A fraction of a second later, a dozen vents, cunningly disguised as cracks and fissures in the rock formations above the sandstalker, erupted. A massive, billowing plume of super-chilled gas erupted from the vents. Raw, unatomized, cryogenic coolant vented directly into the desert atmosphere. The gas, hundreds of degrees below zero, instantly hit the stalker's high-energy cloaking field and its warm body. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The invisible hunter became visible. A shell of brilliant white frost bloomed over its entire form in a split second, flash freezing the moisture in the air, and on its hardened skin, every horrifying detail was suddenly, starkly revealed. The sleek, insectoid head with its cluster of sensory pits, the powerful taut muscles under the dark exoskeleton, the polished terrible scythes, the light-bending energy field, shorted out by the extreme thermal shock, flickered and died, its energy signature collapsing. The Acridian Sandstalker, the galaxy's perfect ambush predator, stumbled. A choked, gurgling screech escaped its maw as the cryogenic cold attacked its alien physiology. It swayed for a moment, a perfect, frosted statue of lethal intent, and then crashed to the sand with a heavy, final thud. The simulation's voice, cold and impassive, echoed throughout the chamber. Target has suffered catastrophic thermal shock resulting in systematic biological failure. All vital signs ceased. Target is incapacitated. Simulation terminated. Breathing heavily, his lungs raw, Cole Carter stood 20 feet away, watching the frost-covered form of his adversary. He looked at the simple, brutal machine he had built. A rock, a panel, a lever. The oppressive heat of the binary suns vanished. The jagged rocks and red sand dissolved. The world around him faded back to the cool, quiet, featureless grey grid of the crucible chamber. At the far end of the lecture hall, a heavy door hissed open. Cole Carter stepped out. He was covered in the simulation dust, a thin, red line of blood still stark against the skin of his bicep, but he was standing. The hall was utterly still. Not a single student moved. Brev, his mouth agape, looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Every eye in the room had shifted, fixed with a terrifying, unified intensity upon Professor Olin. Professor Olin stood frozen behind his lectern, his kith mind, with its perfect eidetic recall, replayed the last 10 minutes in a recursive, agonizing loop. He saw it all again, but this time he understood. The human's run had been a mobile survey, an environmental scan performed under lethal pressure. The rock was a percussive maintenance tool, a key to unlock the world's guts. The panel became a component, a weight, a lever in a machine that hadn't existed moments before. The final move was bait, turning the stalker's own aggression into the trigger. The stalker's talon was a finely honed scalpel, designed for clean, lethal cuts. The human's rock was a crude, brutal hammer, and the hammer doesn't care how sharp the scalpel is. The hammer can break the scalpel, the operating table, and the entire theater. A creature fang and talon, a perfect sword. All his life, Olin had catalogued the swords of the galaxy, ranking them by their sharpness, their weight, their edge. He had built his entire career his entire intellectual legacy on the study of swords. He stared at the frozen, static image on the screen.
But I never once considered the blacksmith.
A soft, unimpressive creature with no natural armor, no claws, no venom. A creature that didn't need to be a weapon because it was something more dangerous. It was a creature that could look at a world, at the very laws of physics that bound it together, and make a weapon of the world itself. The foundation of his 50-year career, the carefully crafted tier system, crumbled into dust in his mind. It was useless. An infant's catalogue of shiny objects. He had been classifying predators by the quality of their teeth, while a creature existed that could turn the planet itself into a giant, gaping mouth. His intellectual bias, his pride, his certainty, it all shattered in an instant, leaving behind only the cold, sharp, and utterly undeniable truth. Olin's gaze swept over the sea of stunned faces, past them to the figure of the human standing in the distant doorway. The image of the student, the Tier 9 soft skin, dissolved. In his place stood the living, breathing embodiment of the terrible new principle Olin had just discovered. He saw a mind that did not fit on his scale, a creature whose deadliest attribute was not biological, but conceptual. And in the pit of his stomach, Olin felt a sensation he hadn't experienced since he was a fledgling, cowering in a high nest during a lightning storm, a primal academic fear mingled with a terrifying, unwilling awe. With hands that trembled almost imperceptibly, Professor Olin slowly, deliberately, turned back to face his class, to face his life's work displayed on the hologram. His proud crest of feathers was flat against his skull. His posture, usually so ramrod straight, was slumped. He looked humbled. He looked, for the first time in his long and storied career, completely and utterly shattered. He raised a hand and gestured to the holographic space above his lectern. With a series of slow, deliberate keystrokes on his control panel, he dismissed the image of the fallen Standstalker. He called up his list, the 13 undisputed apex predators of the known galaxy. The clicks of the keys were the only sound in the dead-still hall. Each one was a hammer blow against the edifice of his own legacy. He selected the first name, Veldressian Plate Lord, Tier 1. The letters glowed, then vanished. He selected the second, Tenebran Shadow Weaver, Tier 2. Delete. Gorend Juggernaut, Tier 3. Brev flinched, as if the world itself had struck him, his 4 arms going limp at his sides. Delete. One by one, he erased them all. The Phage Maw, the Skarnath Death Singer, the chitinous hulk of Eridanus B, each name a monument to a lifetime of research, extinguished with a single brutal click. His entire classification system, the bedrock of modern xenology, wiped from existence in less than a minute. When he was done, the holographic display was blank, empty. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a quiet, ragged thing, stripped of all its former resonance and pride. "My classification system," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth, "is irrelevant." He took a slow, deep breath. His fingers hesitated over the console. The last words, tier, rank, lethality, were meaningless now. They were a language for describing swords, and he had just met the blacksmith. A new lexicon was required, one that accounted for this terrifying new paradigm. He typed a single, stark heading. The glowing letters appeared in the empty space, absolute and final. Category, contextual predator. Beneath it, he made the first and only entry. He ignored the fields for tier and rank. In simple block letters, the truth appeared on the screen. Number 1, human.